Hello and welcome to Voices on AI. I'm Tammy McKenzie, your host, and our guest today is Renee Black. Renee, welcome. Would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. Thanks for having me here. My name is Renee Black, and I am the founder of GoodBot, which is a nonprofit based in Vancouver, BC. I've been in the nonprofit sector for about 15 years, originally running another nonprofit called Peace Geeks, working on the intersection of technology and peace. And now for the last 2 years, I've been working on GoodBot Society, very much spinning out from my previous work from Peace Geeks, ultimately on the recognition that the failure to govern technology was a major factor in a lot of the contexts where conflict was occurring, and just seeing the urgency in advancing governance, both for the purposes of preventing conflict as well as ensuring and safeguarding democratic societies.
Can you give us some examples of where that happened, where I get poor tech governance exacerbated conflict situations? Is that how it is?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what I was working on in my time with Peace Geeks was looking at where technology was playing a role in conflict and looking for examples where it could contribute to peace building, because there's lots of good examples of how it can actually help bring people together. And we were trying to focus on these sort of bridging opportunities. But, what we were finding was, over time as we were doing these projects, that the failure to have certain safeguards. So we were running a project in Jordan for 4 years that was very much a digital peace building initiative there, and we were really proud of the work that we were doing. We had a lot of great support at the community level. And the target was in communities that had been targeted for recruitment of people into various violent groups. And so we were um, we were there because of this targeting. And so social media tools had been used to recruit and radicalize young people. And we were trying to work in a very non-securitized way, looking at how social media and theater and various forms of film and video could be used to help actually address some of the really, critical vulnerabilities that were making some of these communities vulnerable to exploitation by groups that were seeking to exploit these moments, and we were trying to look at how do we amplify some of these messages and some of these issues, and how do you use that to strengthen community. And really what struck me after several years of running this program was that even if we had been sustainably funded, even if the partners that we had on the ground had been sustainably funded, even if the community partners that were working in similar sort of positive interventions initiatives in perpetuity, it wouldn't have been enough to sort of overcome the algorithmic amplification. And that really sort of laid bare for me the fact that we were sort of throwing water on sort of a corner of a burning forest fire, and that it was not going to be enough. It was clearly unsustainable, and so that's what really led to GoodBot.
And how does GoodBot address the problem differently than Peacekeeps did?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we are trying to do is look at how do you address some of the systemic issues that are underlying a lot of what is going on. So, on the social media front in particular, we have been working with a number of organizations on the concept of pro social design governance. Canada has been working to advance this online harms bill for the last couple of years. Sadly, that died with the prorogation of Parliament, but there's also some things that it was missing in terms of how it was addressing the issues. Algorithms did have some attention, and so that may have been the vehicle through which some of this could have been addressed. But quite frankly, there's a bunch of pieces that are essential. So first of all, first and foremost, transparency obligations are essential. Right now, we do not have access to the data to be able to look at what is happening behind the scenes of some of these platforms, to understand the impacts that those platforms are having on society and on mental health and on other areas of our lives. And without access to that data by qualified researchers who are vetted and sort of approved to do this research, we continue to be in the dark because we don't have access to what is happening. But secondly, there's certain things that we do know about how these platforms work. They optimize for certain types of behaviors. They are designed in certain ways so that you don't have control over your feed. So some of the learnings that platforms have taken is, for example, on how casinos keep people zoned into an experience. So when you go into a casino, you follow red carpets. There's rarely hard right turns. It's really trying to flow you to places in a way that is taking away your agency. And when you are in front of some of the machines, they're really trying to create an experience where you are sort of locked into that experience. You don't sort of see and experience the outside world, and so that's meant, again, to keep you locked in. And so phones and social media have replicated some of the learnings from what's happened in casinos in ways that end up kind of and are designed to keep people addicted. And so some of that can come in the form of like autoplay. So you have videos that come up at the top of your screen showing reels. And I'm using Facebook right now just because that's what we were working on quite a lot with our first project. But you have a series of reels. So moving picture is something that is actually more attention grabbing than still photos or text. And then if you're also trying to optimize for revenue, then you're trying to put in their sponsored content. You're trying to put in ads. So what we're starting to see over time is that if we look at, say, for our first 15 or 20 posts, we see a lot less of content of people who are our friends. We see reels, we see add people because they want you to add more people onto the platform because they want you to map the network bigger, not for your interests so you can connect with your friends, but so they can have more information about who your networks are. And then you might have one friend's post, and then you have a sponsored post, and then you have an ad, and then you have a group that they're asking you to follow, and then maybe you have another friend's post. So by the time you get down to 15 or 20, you've maybe seen 3 or 4 friends' posts. And you may have gotten distracted along the way before you even see those posts because they're not the most engaging posts most of the time. And
Uh,
and not only is that the flow, you have no control over that feed in the way it's designed.
so these are the algorithms. These are what you're studying with GoodBot and like working with the government and organizations. Is that
Yeah,
the architecture of the work?
Yeah, I mean, so I would describe some of that as design features and some of that as being algorithms. So, algorithms is what's serving up certain parts of that content. So, the algorithms are going to be serving the video content up in the reels. They're going to be looking for the ones that are most relevant to you. But the design, this layout of this feed, is a design feature. Um, and so it's not just algorithms, it's also the interplay with design that is kind of an issue. And so, and on top of that, you also have the issue that certain players understand how to game that system in a way that sort of benefits their ability to kind of share their own narratives and messages. So, if you're Russia, for example, you can mass create groups and profiles and create disinformation in a way that is increasingly targeted to an individual's personal values, because we know enough these platforms know enough information about you that the ability to target is getting better and better and better. And in that context, we're also dealing with the fact that the ability to mass generate content is getting or personalized content rather is getting better and better and better, and that's a very scary combination, especially because it's a lot harder to detect, and it's so prevalent that you end up having to use a lot of your resources to even discern what you're dealing with and looking at, even if it's from a friend, is a real post.
So targeted misinformation, targeted marketing manipulation, targeted demographic analysis and research that's being done on our data. Is that like on the social media side? I wonder, back to GoodBot, like what concretely are you doing on a day to day to address that, and like how are you dealing with the different stakeholders?
Yeah, so we've been working on this pro-social design governance concept with some organizations in Canada and around the world, and we've done some workshops on this concept. It tends to be a less politicized version of the bill because it tends to focus less on content moderation, placing more emphasis on what are some of the behaviors that are incentivized by this platform that end up kind of being antisocial. And so, so if you can sort of address the behavioral and the incentive structures that kind of create problematic outcomes, then there we believe that you can get to a more healthy information ecosystem. But I think that there's even within that, like there's limitations because right now, social media platforms as they are designed are walled gardens, and you're kind of locked in. And so, when Elon Musk took over Twitter and turned it to X, there was some concern around that, and there's now Blue Sky where you can sort of move to if you want to kind of have a different alternative, but there's really no alternative at the moment to Facebook. And so there's a lot of people who are watching what's happening right now south of the border and very concerned and wanting to basically get off of Facebook, but also not wanting to lose connections with friends. And so open protocols that would allow you to basically own your own data. Facebook is based on a very centralized model where they basically have a platform where you put your data out onto the platform, and they basically own it or have a sort of a license to use it however they want with certain limitations. And so some of what's kind of starting to emerge is decentralized models for having social media, so that in the end you own your data and you can put it where you want to and retract it when you want to. And there's not this walled garden that exists that basically allows for this concentration of power that we've seen, for Mark Zuckerberg. So, we like to see, we are very concerned about this concentration of power. And of course, as we're seeing what's happening with Donald Trump and how he has been really pushing social media companies to do his bidding in a lot of different ways, including by renaming government buildings in a way that sort of suits his agenda, in Canada. And, that feels very important right now.
I couldn't agree more. How can Canadians or Canadian organizations get involved? How can they help you with your work? Um,
Yeah, I mean, we're a network of, we have a group of team members as well as volunteers across the country. So I think we have probably about 70 volunteers at the moment. They tend to be technology professionals. We have companies that get involved with us, universities, and we work on some joint research projects together, and we work on policy papers that are relevant to these kind of broader sets of themes, of like how do we get to a place where we sort of have better control over what is being created about us, and better control over our data. Concepts concept of digital sovereignty, which has been really championed by the Indigenous community for a number of years now, because of a long history of having had data collected and then used about Indigenous communities in ways that were really not in their interests. And so this has been an area where I think a lot of Canadians who are feeling this experience can both learn from what has been happening in that area, and also try to think about what that means for how we think about designing digital ecosystems moving forward.
So I wonder, we talked about it a little earlier. Would you like to talk about some of the hard questions you're facing in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few questions that we've been um, asking. I mean, the overarching question, though, is how do we get to the point of being able to have a sovereign digital, ecosystem? Because increasingly, what is happening because of this concentration of power is a digital colonialism. We are basically having data extracted from us. We are having data being used about us and against us in some ways, increasingly. So this concept of sovereignty encompasses a number of different sub questions. One is, how is our policy landscape being influenced? And so one of the questions that we're looking at right now is, one of the main forms in which we can exert sovereignties through policy. And what we've been curious about is, how is our policy being impacted? And lobbying is the area that is regulated. But what we have started to notice is that there is a lot of areas that are just not covered by lobbying policy that are having significant impacts on our digital sovereignty. So we're trying to understand, what those other influences are. What does lobbying policy miss that we need to be cognizant of so that we can be able to exert digital policy in a sovereign way? So that's one question. I think that there's also another question has been around, within this theme of data sovereignty, we're starting to see copyright cases that are emerging around, authors who are represented by publishing agencies or so on, who are basically suing AI companies for the inappropriate use of their original works in the training of large language models. And that's great. We'll see how those lawsuits come out. But at the same time, there's a significant proportion of the world that is not represented by agencies and lawyers. They're independent publishers or creators, and that constitutes the vast majority of people who are making content that are probably having their data used on these models. And so there's also been a question around, how do you protect the sovereignty and the copyright of those artists as well. And we've also been looking at the impacts on kids, and and trying to work with kids to imagine what a different tech future would look like.
That opens up a whole other slew of questions. I want to loop back a little bit first, and maybe a next time for what you're with your work with your kids. Um, have you identified some gaps in lobbying? You say you found some. You're studying it. Have you identified them? Do you have lists of them? Is there some research you can share with people?
Yeah, we
Um,
have a post coming out on Wednesday, I believe, on this. It's going to be the first in a five-part series. But as an example, and this is going to be imminent in this coming year. So trade policy is going to be one big area. So trade policy doesn't tend to have the same type of oversight as other forms of policy do. And it is an area where we anticipate Trump is going to be trying to exert significant influence, including really trying to erode a lot of what we have right now in ways that will allow him to sort of try to move it towards this 51st state agenda that he has. We believe that he intends to try to erode the ability of basically all protections that Canada has, and we don't know how far that will go, but we believe that that is a significant threat. So that's one example. But for example, whenever you have companies that are sponsoring events, there's a form of a relationship building that is occurring in a way that sort of makes it easier for lobbyists to access certain players in a way that's much harder for people who are working at the civil society level and thinking about public interest.
So if I understand you correctly, the idea is to do research to see where there's gaps in where lobbying is easier or harder than it should be or insufficiently supervised.
Mm-hmm.
And then you address that with policy work addressed at decision makers who can have an effect on how those things are comported, either, I guess, from the government side or from the trade side. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think that this was going to be a challenging conversation even without Trump, but it's become a whole other level because of what his agenda seems to be moving towards. So I do, I think that there's a version of things where I think there's a almost just a doubling down on making sure that we have a sovereignty to protect
Yeah.
that I think is coming, and we're at 1 minute. So
So uh, then I guess we'll wrap up on that subject a little bit. Although I really want to underline what you said because I agree with you completely. The stakes go up when there's a direct threat to certain aspects of our democracy and our choice making, like lobbying or looking for gaps in, what did you call it, gaming the system. I think maybe applies to lobbying as well as to social media manipulation. So if I've summarized that correctly, I think I'll invite people to go and check out the links in the description. We'll have, is it goodbot.ca?
that's right. Yeah.
Goodbot.ca. Can they still go see stuff about Peace Geeks?
Yeah. Peacegeeks.org is the website. Yeah.
And research, like have you published some stuff that people can check out on goodbot.ca, or I guess they follow you on LinkedIn as well. You said there's a post coming out, Facebook.
Yeah. So our tech policy section on our website, it contains our. I'll be talking about the our AI and competition policy piece next Tuesday at the University of Ottawa, but yeah, we have a new piece coming out the first part of the series on lobbying this Wednesday.
Amazing. I'm definitely going to keep track of that and make sure that I keep adding links to those in the description of this so that people who watch it in later weeks will be able to click back to whatever and keep track of what you're working on.
Okay, great.
We wanted to talk a little bit about comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a technologist, as an ethicist, as an applied ethicist in policy, as a think tank director, you've also turned towards comedy as a way of communicating about what's happening in AI, and I would love to hear about it. Like, why comedy and how comedy and what and as always, like. If you want to tell people how they might get some more of that good stuff, that'd be great, because I would love to hear some jokes about AI. But
Mm-hmm.
not from you today, I get it. We're not here to tell jokes, but like to set up a culture where we can be doing that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I just love The Good Place, and I just found it quite amazing that that show ended up being able to take an entirely complex series of thinking on moral philosophy and distill it into a television show where people come away with a reasonable understanding of kind of some of the important aspects of that of philosophy that they otherwise might not have known, and create an arc that I think tells you something that you might not otherwise have taken away. And yeah, I do love the way that comedy can disarm you into learning. and and so I find it to be an effective way to convey some complex messages, and to engage people in issues that they may otherwise not engage with. And Yeah, and I think I had a particular experience. I've been doing comedy for about a year and a half now, and I've been wanting to get into AI comedy myself because of this area that I've been in, and there's actually quite a lot of comedy to find within these topics. I mean, if you can look past how terrifying some of it is, I had a particular experience where I was asked to introduce myself as part of a bigger group conversation. As if AI was introducing me, and in that conversation, I said, "Tell me about Renee." I actually asked ChatGPT, "Tell me about Renee Black, Peace Geeks," because I knew there was more information about me about Peace Geeks, and it came back and it said, uh, "Peace Geeks was launched by Renee Black and Taylor Owen," and I was like, "Okay, that's interesting." I mean, Taylor Owen's a great, brilliant guy, but he had nothing to do with Peace Geeks. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll be a bit more specific this time. Tell me about Renee Black, founder of Peace Geeks, and it came back and said. Peace Geeks was not founded by Renee Black. It was founded by her husband Hamza Farouk, and so that was obviously a bit of a
Is
shock.
your husband Hamza Farouk?
Yeah, I have no husband, so
Oh,
AI hallucinated a husband and gave him credit for my 10 years of work running
and a
a
co-founder.
nonprofit organization, and it felt like a pretty good encapsulation of what's going on with AI. So, and then it kind of gaslit me into basically being grateful because it then gave me an example. It said, on the bright side, you now have a funny story to tell at your next tech conference. And I'm like, okay, well, great. So anyway, so the that was kind of that's become the entry point for my storytelling around in comedy around AI. So yeah.
Sounds like fertile ground. Um, Hopefully, when you're ready to practice a set, you'll want to come and practice it on Voices on AI.
Sure. Yeah.
That about wraps it up for me, Renee. Was there anything like you'd like to add to that, to let people know what you're working on, to let them know how they can connect?
No, I think that's. I mean, we're pretty active. I am active on LinkedIn. We're trying to get a little bit more sort of active on our actual page. Our website's a good place. We have a volunteer application page for anybody who wants to join. We're always looking for sort of corporate and university partners. So if you are interested, then reach out.
I know I'll keep reaching out, and thank you for your work, and thank you for coming on the show today.